Pilot humiliates Barack Obama, but what happened next shocked everyone. Some secrets are worth risking everything for, even if it means facing the most powerful man in the world. Hey everyone, if you're new here, make sure to smash that like button, hit subscribe and activate those notifications. Drop a comment letting me know which city you're watching from. I love connecting with all of you. It was a crisp autumn morning in 2013 when Air Force One sat gleaming on the tarmac at Andrews Air Force Base. Captain James Morrison, a decorated pilot with 20 years of service, was about to make a decision that would send ripples through the White House and beyond. As President Obama approached the aircraft for a routine flight to New York, something felt different. The usual military precision of the morning was about to be shattered by an unprecedented act of defiance. The tension in the air was palpable as the president's security detail noticed Captain Morrison's unusual behavior. The pilot's stance was rigid, his jaw set with determination. What happened next would be recorded in history books, but the real story, the one that unfolded behind closed doors, would prove far more explosive than anyone could have imagined. Secret Service agents exchanged worried glances as Captain Morrison broke protocol in a way that had never been seen before in presidential travel history. But what they didn't know was that the pilot held information that could shake the very foundation of the administration. Information that would make the WikiLeaks scandal look like a minor leak in comparison. What drove a decorated military officer to risk everything on this fateful morning? And more importantly, how would the most powerful man in the world respond to this unprecedented challenge to his authority? As the story unfolds, you'll discover that sometimes the biggest battles aren't fought on military battlefields, but in the quiet corridors of power, where loyalty and betrayal dance a dangerous tango. The consequences of what happened that morning would echo through the halls of the White House for years to come. Stay tuned as we unravel this incredible story of power, betrayal, and ultimate revenge. Because sometimes the most dangerous enemies aren't foreign powers or terrorist threats. They're the ones who know your deepest secrets. Want to know what happened next? Keep watching to discover the shocking truth that the mainstream media never dared to reveal. Captain James Morrison wasn't always a man who would dare to challenge presidential authority. A third-generation Air Force pilot, his office walls were adorned with commendations from 3 different presidents. His grandfather had flown during World War II, his father in Vietnam, and James himself had served with distinction in both Iraq wars. The Morrison name was synonymous with loyalty and honor in military circles. But 6 months ago, something changed. During a classified mission over Eastern Europe, Morrison had intercepted the encrypted communication that wasn't meant for his ears. What he discovered that day had kept him awake every night since, wrestling with his conscience and the oath he took to protect his country. The White House staff knew Morrison well. Sarah Chen, the president's deputy chief of staff, had always admired his professionalism. She noticed his change in behavior over the past months, the dark circles under his eyes, the way his hands would slightly shake when certain topics came up during pre-flight briefings. But she never imagined he would do what he was about to do. President Obama himself had always appreciated Morrison's steady presence. They had shared countless conversations during flights, discussing everything from basketball to foreign policy. The president had even attended Morrison's daughter's high school graduation last year, a gesture that had meant the world to the pilot's family. But now, as the morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac, the weight of what Morrison had discovered pressed heavily on his shoulders. The USB drive in his pocket felt like it weighed a ton, containing information that could potentially rewrite recent American history. The regular security protocols at Andrews Air Force Base were running smoothly that morning. Agent Thomas Rodriguez, head of the president's traveling security detail, was going through his usual checklist. 20 years on the job had taught him to trust his instincts, and something about Morrison's demeanor set off warning bells he couldn't ignore. In the background, White House Communications Director Jennifer Walsh was briefing reporters about the president's upcoming speech at the United Nations. She had no idea that her carefully crafted narrative about American diplomatic transparency was about to be shattered. The stakes were impossibly high. Morrison knew that what he was about to do would not only end his career, but could potentially land him in federal prison. His wife Maria, a high school teacher, and their 2 teenage daughters would face the fallout of his actions. The comfortable life they'd built in their Alexandria, Virginia home could crumble in an instant. But the alternative, staying silent about what he knew, was no longer an option. The information he possessed revealed a pattern of deception that went beyond partisan politics. It wasn't about Democrat versus Republican, it was about the fundamental principles of American democracy. As President Obama's motorcade approached the base, Morrison thought about his father's words from years ago. "Son, sometimes doing the right thing means being willing to lose everything." He never truly understood those words until now. The morning air was thick with tension as Secret Service agents took their positions around Air Force One. In the next few minutes, Captain James Morrison would either become a footnote in history or change its course entirely. The choice he was about to make would set in motion a chain of events that would reach the highest levels of government and expose secrets that powerful people had fought desperately to keep hidden. The real question wasn't whether he would act, but whether America was ready for the truth he was about to reveal. As President Obama ascended the steps of Air Force One, Morrison's heart pounded in his chest. The moment of truth had arrived. Breaking every protocol in the book, he stepped out of the cockpit and into the main cabin, blocking the path to the president's private quarters. "Mr. President, I need 5 minutes of your time." Morrison's voice was steady despite his internal turmoil. Secret Service agents immediately tensed, hands moving toward their weapons. Agent Rodriguez stepped forward, but Obama raised his hand, signaling him to wait. "Captain Morrison, this is highly irregular." The president's voice was calm, but his eyes narrowed with concern. "Whatever this is about, there are proper channels." "Sir, with all due respect, those channels are compromised," Morrison interrupted, pulling out the USB drive. "What I found during Operation Silent Echo wasn't a coincidence. The civilian casualties weren't collateral damage. They were the target." The president's expression darkened. Sarah Chen, standing nearby, quickly dismissed the other staffers from the cabin. The tension in the air became electric. "Captain, you're treading on dangerous ground," Obama warned, his usual warmth replaced by a steely gaze. "Some matters of national security require difficult decisions." "Like silencing whistleblowers," Morrison challenged. "Like what happened to David Chen." Sarah Chen's head snapped up at the mention of her brother's name. David had disappeared 3 months ago while working as a data analyst for the Defense Department. The official story was a hiking accident in Colorado. "I have proof that links his disappearance to Operation Silent Echo," Morrison continued, "the same operation that resulted in the deaths of 37 civilians who supposedly died in a gas leak incident. But we both know what really happened in that village, don't we, Mr. President?" Secret Service agents moved closer, but Obama again held them back. His face was unreadable now, a mask of presidential authority. "What exactly are you hoping to achieve here, Captain?" the president asked quietly. "Justice," Morrison replied. "For David Chen, for those civilians, and for every American who believes in what this country is supposed to stand for. You have 1 hour to make this right, or everything goes public, including the Maxwell files." The color drained from Obama's face at the mention of the Maxwell files. Even Sarah Chen, with her high-level clearance, had only heard whispers about their contents. "You're bluffing," Jennifer Walsh spoke up from the corner, her PR instincts kicking in. "You wouldn't risk—" "My career, my freedom, my life?" Morrison laughed bitterly. "Look what happened to David Chen for knowing far less than I do. I've already sent insurance packages to multiple sources. If anything happens to me or my family, everything comes out. The president studied Morrison for a long moment before speaking. You're assuming you understand the full picture, Captain. Sometimes what looks like corruption from the outside is actually... Save it, Morrison cut him off. I've seen the video footage. I've read the emails. I know about Project Artemis and what really happened to Senator McConnell's daughter. 1 hour, Mr. President. Either you address this publicly and initiate a full congressional investigation, or I do it my way. As Morrison turned to leave, Agent Rodriguez stepped in his path. Captain, you're not going anywhere. Stand down, Tom, Obama ordered, surprising everyone. Let him go. Morrison walked off the plane, his legs somehow steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his body. He could feel the weight of dozens of eyes on him, Secret Service, White House staff, ground crew, all witnesses to this unprecedented breach of protocol. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, Sarah Chen's voice called out behind him. Was it worth it, James? Throwing away everything for this? Morrison turned back one last time, looking up at the assembled power players of American politics. Ask your brother that question, Sarah, if you ever find him. The next 60 minutes would determine not just Morrison's fate, but potentially the course of American history. What he didn't know was that forces were already in motion, forces that had been planning for this contingency for months. The real question wasn't whether he would survive the next hour, but whether anyone involved would emerge unscathed from what was about to unfold. While Morrison's ultimatum hung in the air, multiple scenes were unfolding across Washington, D.C. In a dimly lit office at the Pentagon, General Marcus Hayes was already receiving word of the confrontation. His weathered fingers drummed against a manila folder marked Operation Silent Echo, Terminal Protocol. Get me Director Campbell, he barked into his secure line. Tell him it's a code black. Meanwhile, Maria Morrison was teaching her high school history class when she noticed 2 men in dark suits entering the school's main office. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her phone, seeing a prearranged signal from James, a single text message reading, "Checkmate." Across town, in a basement office of the Washington Post, veteran reporter Rachel Martinez was opening an encrypted email containing documents that would make Watergate look like a parking ticket. The sender's identity was anonymous, but the content was explosive. Detailed logs of Project Artemis, surveillance photos, and a video file that made her gasp audibly. Sarah Chen was facing her own crisis of conscience on Air Force One. Her brother David's last words to her echoed in her mind. Sometimes the truth isn't what we've been told to believe. She glanced at her phone, thumb hovering over a contact labeled DC, a secure channel she hadn't used in months. In New York, Senator McConnell's daughter wasn't actually missing, as the public believed. Catherine McConnell was very much alive, living under an assumed name, her existence a carefully guarded secret that tied directly to the Maxwell files. She watched the news ticker with growing anxiety, wondering if today would be the day her father's true role in Project Artemis would come to light. Jennifer Walsh, the White House communications director, was already crafting multiple narratives, each designed to discredit Morrison if necessary. But her usual confidence wavered as she remembered a conversation from 6 months ago when she'd noticed irregularities in the Silent Echo reports. She'd been told to ignore them. Now she understood why. Agent Rodriguez, despite following the president's orders to let Morrison go, had quietly activated a special response team. These weren't regular Secret Service agents, but members of a shadowy unit that technically didn't exist. Their orders were simple: contain the situation by any means necessary. In the CIA's operations center, analysts were frantically trying to trace Morrison's digital footprint, unaware that he had spent months preparing for this moment. Every time they thought they had located his insurance files, they found only elaborate decoys. The president himself sat in his private cabin, phone in hand, contemplating a call he never thought he'd have to make. The number belonged to someone known only as the architect, the true mastermind behind Project Artemis. Even Obama didn't know their real identity. At Andrews Air Force Base, Morrison walked calmly to his car, fully aware of the surveillance teams tracking his every move. What they didn't know was that his actual destination wasn't any of the locations they had under surveillance. The real evidence was hidden somewhere so obvious that no one would think to look there. Each of these threads was now pulling tight, creating a web of intrigue that threatened to ensnare everyone involved. The next few hours would determine not just the fate of those directly involved, but potentially the entire power structure of American government. As Morrison drove away from the base, he glanced at his rearview mirror, noting the black SUVs beginning to follow him. Everything was proceeding exactly as he had planned. What his pursuers didn't realize was that they weren't just following a rogue pilot. They were being led into a trap that had been years in the making. The president's private phone buzzed exactly 47 minutes into Morrison's ultimatum. The caller ID showed a number he'd never seen before, but the message was clear. Turn on CNN. What happened next would change everything. Live on national television, Catherine McConnell stood at a podium in front of the Lincoln Memorial. The supposedly missing daughter of Senator McConnell was very much alive, and she wasn't alone. Beside her stood David Chen, Sarah's supposedly dead brother, along with 3 other presumed victims of accidents related to Project Artemis. My name is Catherine McConnell, her voice steady as cameras flashed, and everything you're about to hear has been verified by multiple sources. On Air Force One, the blood drained from every face in the cabin. Sarah Chen's phone clattered to the floor as she saw her brother, alive and determined, standing before the world's media. Project Artemis wasn't a defense initiative, Catherine continued. It was a systematic program designed to eliminate political dissidents and whistleblowers under the guise of accidents and terrorist attacks. My own father, Senator McConnell, helped orchestrate it. The president's secure line erupted with calls. General Hayes was shouting about containment protocols. The CIA director was demanding immediate action, but it was too late. Morrison hadn't just been a pilot with damaging information. He had been the linchpin in an elaborate sting operation years in the making. Every person who had supposedly been silenced by Project Artemis had actually been extracted and protected, gathering evidence, waiting for this moment. Captain Morrison, Obama muttered, finally understanding. He was never going to release files. He was the distraction. In his car, Morrison smiled as he heard Catherine's voice on the radio. His role as the decoy had worked perfectly. While every intelligence agency in Washington focused on him and his supposed USB drive, the real operation was unfolding at the Lincoln Memorial. But the biggest shock was yet to come. Catherine held up a tablet, playing a video that made the assembled crowd gasp. It showed a secret meeting from 2 years ago, high-ranking officials from both parties, intelligence agencies, and private military contractors, all planning Project Artemis. Among them was the architect, their identity finally revealed, the vice president himself. The revelation hit Washington like a nuclear bomb. Phones started ringing across the Capitol, emergency meetings were called, damage control protocols were initiated, but the truth was already spreading faster than anyone could contain it. Agent Rodriguez received new orders. Stand down. The game was over. Sarah Chen, tears streaming down her face as she watched her brother speak truth to power, made her decision. She walked to the president's cabin, resignation letter in hand, ready to tell everything she knew. Jennifer Walsh's carefully crafted narratives crumbled as more evidence flooded the media. Every major news outlet was running with the story. Social media exploded. The hashtag #TrueProjectArtemis trended worldwide. But Morrison's car never reached its supposed destination. Instead, he drove to a small airfield where Maria and their daughters were waiting. Their new identities were ready, their escape route planned. Despite the victory, they knew there would be those who would seek revenge. Back on Air Force One, President Obama faced the hardest decision of his presidency. The evidence was overwhelming. The conspiracy reached into every branch of government, and at the center of it all was his own vice president. "Get me a secure line to the Attorney General," he finally said, "and prepare for an emergency address to the nation." The power structure that had seemed so unshakable that morning was now crumbling. Project Artemis, designed to silence dissent, had instead become the catalyst for the biggest political scandal in American history. Catherine McConnell ended her press conference with words that would be quoted for years to come. "The truth doesn't need to hide behind violence and deception. Today, we prove that justice can prevail, even against the most powerful forces in our nation." The clock struck noon in Washington, D.C. Morrison's 1-hour ultimatum had expired, but it had never been about the hour at all. It had been about timing the perfect moment when all the pieces would fall into place, when the truth would be too big to bury. The aftermath was immediate and explosive. Within hours of Catherine McConnell's revelation, the vice president was taken into custody by FBI agents. Images of his arrest at his private residence dominated every news channel. His expression, a mixture of rage and disbelief, became the defining photo of the scandal. Social media erupted, with archived footage of accidents now being re-examined. Conspiracy theorists who had been dismissed for years were suddenly vindicated. The hashtag #Project Artemis generated over 10 million tweets in just 3 hours. General Hayes, realizing the extent of exposure, made a decisive move. Rather than face inevitable prosecution, he began cooperating with federal investigators. His testimony implicated dozens of high-ranking officials across multiple agencies. "The scale of this conspiracy is unprecedented," declared a special CNN broadcast. "We're looking at potentially hundreds of individuals involved in covering up political assassinations disguised as accidents." Sarah Chen, having submitted her resignation, held a private meeting with her brother David. Their tearful reunion was captured by a photographer and became the human face of the scandal. David revealed how Morrison had helped fake his death and extract him to safety, along with other whistleblowers. "Morrison wasn't just a pilot," David explained to investigators. "He was our guardian angel, using his position to identify targets before they could be eliminated and helping them disappear." President Obama addressed the nation that evening from the Oval Office. "My fellow Americans, today, we have witnessed one of the darkest chapters in our nation's history. I want to be clear, I had no knowledge of Project Artemis's true nature. However, as your president, I bear ultimate responsibility for what happened under my administration. I've ordered a full congressional investigation." The stock market responded with sharp declines as major defense contractors connected to Project Artemis saw their shares plummet. Emergency board meetings were called across the corporate landscape as companies scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. Jennifer Walsh, the former White House communications director, was found in her apartment having apparently attempted suicide. She survived and later became a key witness, revealing how the conspiracy maintained its public facade. Senator McConnell, faced with his daughter's testimony and overwhelming evidence of his involvement, suffered a stress-induced stroke. As he recovered under guard in a federal medical facility, prosecutors built their case against him and dozens of others. International reactions were swift. Allies demanded explanations. Enemy states used the scandal for propaganda. The United Nations called for an international inquiry into similar programs that might exist in other countries. But the most profound consequences were felt in ordinary American homes. People began questioning every major news story of the past decade. How many other accidents had been orchestrated? How deep did the deception go? Maria Morrison, now safely relocated with her family under witness protection, watched the chaos unfold on television from a safe house. Their sacrifice had exposed the truth, but the cost was their former life and identity. "Mom," her youngest daughter asked, "are we ever going back home?" Maria could only hold her daughter closer, knowing their old life was gone forever. The truth had won, but victory came with a price. Agent Rodriguez, who had chosen to support the exposure of Project Artemis rather than maintain the conspiracy, was promoted to head a new oversight division designed to prevent similar programs from ever forming again. As the sun set on that historic day, the American political landscape had been fundamentally altered. Trust in government institutions hit historic lows. Demands for transparency and accountability reached fever pitch. A new era of political activism and citizen journalism was born. The question on everyone's mind: what other secrets still remained hidden? In the months that followed the exposure of Project Artemis, America underwent a painful but necessary period of reckoning and reform. The scandal had shaken the nation to its core, but from this turmoil emerged a renewed commitment to transparency and accountability. Captain James Morrison, once vilified by some as a traitor, was now hailed as a hero by many. His journey from decorated pilot to whistleblower became a symbol of moral courage. However, the transition wasn't easy for him or his family. Living under new identities in a small town in the Pacific Northwest, the Morrisons struggled to adjust to their new reality. James often woke up in cold sweats, haunted by the faces of those he couldn't save. Maria, ever his rock, encouraged him to seek therapy. "You did the right thing," she would remind him, "but doing the right thing doesn't mean it's easy to live with." Slowly, James began to heal. He started writing a memoir, not for fame or fortune, but as a way to process his experiences and provide a roadmap for future whistleblowers. The working title, Turbulence, Navigating the Skies of Moral Duty. Meanwhile, Sarah Chen had transformed from a cog in the political machine to a fierce advocate for government transparency. Her unique perspective as both a former insider and the sister of a whistleblower made her a powerful voice in the reform movement. "We can't undo the past," she testified before a congressional committee, "but we can damn well make sure it never happens again." Her brother David, along with Catherine McConnell and the other survivors of Project Artemis, formed a support group that evolved into an influential non-profit organization, Phoenix Rising. Their mission was to support whistleblowers and push for legislative reforms to protect those who expose government wrongdoing. President Obama, in the twilight of his presidency, made government reform his primary focus. He signed the Transparency and Accountability Act, which strengthened protections for whistleblowers and established an independent oversight committee with real teeth. "This is not about politics," Obama declared at the signing ceremony. "This is about preserving the very essence of our democracy." The media landscape underwent its own revolution. With trust in traditional news sources at an all-time low, a new breed of investigative journalists emerged. They leveraged technology and crowdsourced information to uncover other hidden abuses of power. Rachel Martinez, the Washington Post reporter who had received Morrison's initial leak, won a Pulitzer Prize for her series on Project Artemis. Her acceptance speech became a rallying cry for a new era of journalism. "Our job isn't just to report the news," she said. "It's to shine a light in the darkest corners of power, no matter the cost." The tech industry responded to the scandal by developing new tools for secure communication and data protection. Encryption became a household term, and apps designed to protect whistleblowers saw downloads in the millions. Even Hollywood got involved. A big-budget thriller based on Morrison's story was in production, with A-list stars vying for the lead roles. James had mixed feelings about this, but understood that his story could inspire others to stand up for what's right. On the first anniversary of the Project Artemis revelation, a memorial was unveiled in Washington, D.C., honoring those who had lost their lives to the conspiracy. James and Maria Morrison attended incognito, blending into the crowd as they listened to the speeches. As they stood there hand in hand, James felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to see a young Air Force lieutenant, eyes wide with recognition. "Sir," the lieutenant whispered, "I just wanted to say, you're the reason I joined. To make things right." James nodded, emotion welling up in his throat. For the first time in months, he felt the weight on his shoulders lighten just a bit. That night, as the Morrisons watched the sunset from their new home, Maria turned to James with a smile. "You know," she said, "I think we're going to be okay." James looked at his wife, then at his daughters doing homework at the kitchen table. He thought about the lieutenant, about Sarah and David Chen, about all the people fighting to make the country better. "Yeah," he replied, a cautious hope in his voice. "I think we are." The road ahead was still long and uncertain. Trust needed to be rebuilt, systems reformed, vigilance maintained. But for the first time since that fateful day on the tarmac, James Morrison felt something he hadn't in a long time: pride in his country and hope for its future. As the second anniversary of the Project Artemis revelation approached, tensions in Washington, D.C. reached a fever pitch. The sweeping reforms and investigations had unearthed even deeper layers of corruption, leading all the way to foreign interference and shadowy international consortiums. James Morrison, still living under an assumed identity, received an encrypted message from Sarah Chen. They found the Pandora files. "It's all coming to a head." The Pandora files were the ultimate insurance policy, a collection of documents so explosive that even Morrison had hoped they'd never see the light of day. They contained evidence of high-level collusion between US officials and foreign powers, details of black ops that made Project Artemis look tame in comparison, and financial records that implicated some of the world's most powerful people. Morrison knew that the release of these files would shake the foundations of global politics. He also knew that those implicated would stop at nothing to prevent their exposure. In New York, Catherine McConnell was putting the final touches on a groundbreaking exposé, working with a team of international journalists to corroborate every detail in the Pandora files. Her phone buzzed with a warning from an anonymous source: "They're coming for you. Go dark now." Across the Atlantic in London, David Chen was meeting with members of European intelligence agencies who had agreed to help validate the Pandora files. As he left the secure facility, he noticed a black SUV tailing him. His pulse quickened as he activated a panic button on his phone, alerting his security team. Back in D.C., Sarah Chen was in a secret meeting with the new vice president and a select group of trusted officials. "We have 48 hours before the story breaks," she informed them. "We need to decide how we're going to respond when it does." The vice president's face was grim. The ramifications of this: it could destabilize entire regions. We're talking potential economic collapse, diplomatic crises, maybe even war. "And if we try to suppress it?" Sarah asked, already knowing the answer. "Then we're no better than those we replaced," the VP replied firmly. Meanwhile, in a high-security prison, the former vice president, the man once known as the Architect, received a visitor. The conversation was brief, but the message was clear. It's time to activate the fail-safe protocol. Within hours, a series of seemingly unrelated events began to unfold. Power outages hit major cities across the United States. The stock market experienced unexplainable fluctuations. Emergency broadcasts tested in several states, causing panic. Key government websites went offline. Rumors of a potential terrorist threat began circulating on social media. James Morrison, recognizing the signs of a coordinated disinformation campaign, knew he had to act. He reached out to his old contacts in the Air Force, calling in favors and reactivating networks he'd hoped never to use again. "It's happening," he told Maria. "I have to go." Maria, fear and determination in her eyes, nodded. "We knew this day might come." Be careful. As Morrison prepared to leave the safety of his hideout, news broke that shook him to his core. Rachel Martinez, the Pulitzer-winning journalist who had first reported on Project Artemis, had been found dead in her apartment. The official cause, apparent suicide. Morrison knew better. This was a message and a declaration of war. In the White House Situation Room, the president was briefed on the escalating crisis. "Sir, we believe this is a coordinated attempt to create chaos and prevent the release of the Pandora files." The president's response was resolute. "We will not be intimidated. The truth comes out no matter the cost." As the clock ticked down, the players in this high-stakes game moved into position. Catherine McConnell and her team went into lockdown, determined to publish their findings. David Chen raced to secure copies of the Pandora files in multiple locations. Sarah Chen prepared for the political firestorm that was about to engulf Washington. And James Morrison, the man who had started it all, steeled himself for one last mission. The next 24 hours would determine not just the fate of the United States, but the future of global democracy itself. The stage was set for a final confrontation that would make the initial Project Artemis revelation look like a mere prelude. The next 24 hours unfolded like a high-stakes chess game, with moves and countermoves playing out on a global scale. At 0600 hours, James Morrison arrived in Washington, D.C., using a series of pre-arranged safe houses to avoid detection. He made contact with Sarah Chen, who had set up a makeshift command center in a nondescript office building. "We've got confirmation," Sarah told him, her voice tense. "The fail-safe protocol isn't just about creating chaos. They're planning to frame you and the others as foreign agents. They've fabricated evidence linking you to Russia, China, and Iran." Morrison's jaw tightened. "They're trying to discredit us before the Pandora files go public." Across the Atlantic, David Chen was in a race against time. He had successfully evaded his pursuers in London, but now faced a new challenge. The secure servers containing backup copies of the Pandora files were under cyber attack. "We're losing access," he shouted to his team of hackers. "Initiate Protocol Hydra." Protocol Hydra was their last resort. A plan to disperse fragments of the Pandora files across thousands of individual computers worldwide, making it impossible to completely erase the data. Meanwhile, Catherine McConnell and her team of journalists were holed up in a fortified hotel suite in New York, putting the finishing touches on their exposé. Suddenly, the power in the building went out. "They've found us," Catherine realized. Without hesitation, she activated a satellite uplink, determined to transmit the story, no matter what. Back in D.C., the White House was in crisis mode. The president, surrounded by his top advisors, received word that military units loyal to the conspirators were mobilizing. "Mr. President," the Secretary of Defense warned, "we have reports of unauthorized troop movements outside the capital. This could be the beginning of a coup attempt." The president's response was immediate. "Initiate Operation Liberty Bell and get me Morrison on the line." Operation Liberty Bell was a contingency plan developed in secret after the Project Artemis revelations, a protocol to protect the continuity of government in case of an internal threat. As chaos engulfed the capital, James Morrison made his move. Using his knowledge of military protocols and the trust he still commanded among many in the Air Force, he coordinated with loyal units to secure key strategic points around Washington. Sarah Chen, working with a team of ethical hackers, fought to keep communication lines open as the conspirators attempted to shut down the internet and cell networks. At 1200 hours, Catherine McConnell's team finally broke through the electronic blockade. The Pandora files began to leak online, causing a tsunami of information that overwhelmed censorship attempts. The revelations were staggering, evidence of a shadow government involving top officials from multiple countries, detailed plans for false flag operations designed to manipulate global events, financial records showing trillions of dollars in hidden transactions. As the information spread, public reaction was immediate and intense. Protests erupted in major cities around the world. Financial markets went into freefall as implicated corporations saw their stocks plummet. The conspirators, realizing their plan was unraveling, made one last desperate move. They activated sleeper agents within key media organizations to spread disinformation, claiming the Pandora files were an elaborate hoax. This is where Morrison's foresight proved crucial. In the months leading up to this moment, he had worked with Sarah Chen and others to build a network of trusted journalists, fact-checkers, and public figures who could validate the authenticity of the files. As the battle for truth played out in the media and online, the physical confrontation came to a head in Washington. Loyal military units, guided by Morrison's insider knowledge, successfully contained the coup attempt. At 1800 hours, in a historic moment, the president addressed the nation from a secure location. My fellow Americans, today we face the greatest threat to our democracy since the Civil War. But I stand before you to say that the forces of truth and justice are prevailing. As he spoke, news came in from around the world. Interpol launched coordinated raids, arresting dozens of high-profile figures implicated in the Pandora files. The United Nations convened an emergency session to address the global implications of the revelations. Whistleblowers in other countries, emboldened by the events in the US, came forward with their own revelations. By midnight, it was clear that the tide had turned. The conspiracy, vast as it was, couldn't withstand the power of truth unleashed on a global scale. James Morrison, watching the president's address from the command center, felt a complex mix of emotions: relief, vindication, and a profound sense of responsibility for what would come next. Sarah Chen approached him, exhaustion and triumph in her eyes. "It's over, James. We did it." Morrison shook his head slightly. "No, Sarah, it's not over. It's just beginning. The real work starts now." As a new day dawned, the world had changed irrevocably. The old power structures were crumbling, and from the chaos, a chance for true reform emerged. The question now was, could humanity rise to the challenge of building a more just and transparent global society? In the weeks following the release of the Pandora files and the thwarted coup attempt, the world grappled with the enormity of the revelations. The immediate aftermath was a period of unprecedented global cooperation and reform. James Morrison, no longer in hiding, testified before a special joint session of Congress. His words were broadcast around the world. "We stand at a crossroads in human history. The Pandora files have exposed the depths of corruption that have plagued our global systems. But they have also shown us the power of truth and the courage of individuals who refuse to be silenced. Now we have a choice to make: to rebuild our institutions on a foundation of transparency and accountability, or to allow fear and cynicism to drive us back into the shadows." The impact of Morrison's actions rippled across society. A new international treaty, dubbed the Global Transparency Accord, was ratified by over 150 countries, establishing stringent anti-corruption measures and protections for whistleblowers. The United Nations underwent a major restructuring, with new checks and balances put in place to prevent the concentration of power. A decentralized, blockchain-based system for government record-keeping was implemented in several countries, making it nearly impossible to manipulate public data. Education systems worldwide introduced new curricula focused on media literacy, critical thinking, and civic responsibility. The Pulitzer Committee created a new category for transformative journalism, with Rachel Martinez awarded the inaugural prize posthumously. Catherine McConnell, now a respected voice in international affairs, spearheaded a global initiative to support investigative journalism. "The pen is mightier than the sword," she often said, "but only if we ensure it remains free and sharp." David Chen's work in cybersecurity led to the development of new technologies to protect privacy while ensuring transparency in public institutions. His efforts earned him a Nobel Prize in Peace. Sarah Chen, leveraging her insider knowledge and newfound public trust, ran for and won a Senate seat, becoming a powerful advocate for continued reform and vigilance. As for James and Maria Morrison, they chose to step back from the public eye. They settled in a quiet coastal town, where James focused on mentoring young people interested in public service and ethical leadership. On the 5th anniversary of the Pandora Files release, James sat on his porch, watching the sunset. Maria joined him, handing him a letter that had just arrived. "It's from the president," she said softly. James opened it, reading aloud, "Your courage changed the course of history. While there is still much work to be done, we have laid the foundation for a more just and transparent world. Future generations will remember your name as a beacon of hope and integrity." He folded the letter, a mix of emotions playing across his face. Maria took his hand, understanding without words the weight of their journey. As the last light faded from the sky, James Morrison realized that while the fight for truth and justice would never truly end, he had helped tilt the scales in the right direction. And in that moment, he felt a profound sense of peace. 10 years after the Pandora Files revelation, a young journalist visited James Morrison at his coastal home. As they walked along the beach, she asked him, "Do you think we've truly changed? Is the world really more transparent now?" Morrison paused, looking out at the horizon. "We've made progress," he said thoughtfully, "but vigilance is a constant necessity. The price of freedom is eternal watchfulness." He turned to the journalist with a smile. "The real change isn't in institutions, it's in people. More are willing to stand up, to question, to demand better. That's the true legacy of what happened. The future is in your hands now." And there you have it, folks, the incredible true story of James Morrison and the Pandora Files. A tale of courage, sacrifice, and the power of truth to change the world. If you've watched this far, you're clearly someone who cares about justice and transparency. So here's my challenge to you. Be vigilant. Question everything. Stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with others. And if you want to see more content like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell.